When it comes to the Republican Party, what the fuck do they want? Although Donald Trump's re-election campaign has shifted into full strange force with an empty 2020 convention, it is a tough question to answer. In June, the faux news host Sean Insanity had asked Trump to name his top priority agenda items for his second term at a town hall held in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The fake the fake commander in chief's answer was, the word experience is still good. I always say talent is more important than experience. I've always said that, but that word experience is a very important word. It's a very important meaning. I never did this before. I never slept over in Washington. I was in Washington, I think, 17 times. All of a sudden, I'm fake president of the United States. You know the story. Now I know everybody, and I have great people in the administration. No, you don't. You make some mistakes. He says an idiot like the former National Security Advisor John Bolton. All he wanted to do was drop bombs on everybody. You don't have to drop bombs on everybody. You don't have to kill people. Trump's campaign website provides no clear message. It offers a threadbare recounting of his supposed accomplishments from his first term and a selection of festive collectibles. It contains no detailed, forward-facing policy section, no vision of how to recover from the pandemic that we're in, no projection of a post-coronavirus future. There's just a list of bullet points that the campaign put on the eve of the convention. Partner with other nations to clean up our planet's ocean, build the world's greatest infrastructure system, and these are not plans so much as slogans, albeit ones that aren't particularly catchy. The GOP in general is remarkably quiet in how it would govern and what it seeks to accomplish in the upcoming years. Breaking with precedent, the party decided against producing an original platform for the 2020 convention. Put differently, it no platformed itself, meaning that they don't have anything to run on. And the Republican leadership has gone dark on a huge swath of issues, like balancing the budget, reforming entitlement programs, tackling climate change, improving public education, reducing student loan debt, and the racial inequalities, as well as getting the country through the pandemic and out of the recession that we're in now. With the planet burning, the virus killing everybody, the economy collapsing, and millions of Americans preparing to vote, the country's leading political cabal has moved into a queasy post-policy space. Its aperture has narrowed to just a few issues. Its desire to try to pass major proactive legislation has withered. This is not just proof that a man as interested as his own image, as he is uninterested in briefing books, should not be president. It's also a sign that America's democracy is in peril. This summer, people had run around asking politicians and like think tank staffers, electoral consultants, political scientists, and pollsters why the Republican Party has felt so small, so devoid of any vanguard ideas to help Americans. The answer lies within the party itself, as well as the fake president. This development is due to decades-long demographic, cultural, and political trends, not just the makeup of the Trump administration. And understanding how Republicans moved past policy requires looking not just at the negative space they left behind, but the positive space that they have chosen to fill. Many of us would recall that Trump's 2016 campaign was full of punchy lines like balancing the budget, repealing the Affordable Care Act, replacing it with a forever TBD universal health care plan, and restoring manufacturing and ending the trade deficit, building a beautiful border wall which hasn't yet to be built, and making America hate again. Trump made none of that happen, besides from a few miles of expansive fence, anyway. Nor did Republicans in Congress seize the reins when Trump came into office. Given the gift of a unified government for 2 years, the GDP did not privatize Social Security. They did not block grant the Medicaid or pass the balanced budget amendment. That is, it abandoned the raft of policy plans it developed under House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan. It did manage a giant tax cut, though, with little reform of the underlying code. Some sanctions and a criminal justice bill. Democrats indicated 1,000 times that they would vote for a bipartisan infrastructure plan. Even that went nowhere. Comparing today's GOP with that of prior Congress and prior administrations is instructive. The Obama White House in its first term brought to fruition the Children's Health Insurance Plan, the Affordable Care Act, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Bill, and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, also while pushing hard on immigration reform and major jobs legislations and nearly completing the deal with Republicans on the debt. The George W. Bush administration got sweeping tax cuts, the Patriot Act, the Homeland Security Act, the No Child Left Behind Act, Medicare Part D, and the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, all while prosecuting two major wars. And the assessment of Sarah Bender, a political scientist at George Washington University and the Brookings Institution, basically she said that Trump wasted his early congressional majority and his record pales behind those of other modern presidents. This party is not making any big promises going into the 2020 election. The most obvious explanation is that Trump does not care much about his policy. He often seems uninterested in the work of the presidency and the extraordinary power and opportunity it affords, and he's uninterested in learning what he could do with it if he felt like it. He does not read intelligence briefings reports or think tank proposals. He does not dine with the nation's top experts. His administration is filled with neophytes and yes men. He watches a lot of television and plays golf a lot. Yeah, we knew that. Even his 2016 promises were rhetorical, not technocratic. Trump was to be taken seriously, but not literally, as you might have heard. Trump is not really much of a pragmatic policymaker. He's about themes and values. Pippa Norris, a comparative political scientist at Harvard, told people, citing his nativism and nationalism as those core values. Once in office, then it was perhaps unsurprising that Trump tended to do things the easy way, tossing off executive orders, rather than engaging in the Lyndon B. Johnson-type persuasive politics to get big, complicated bills passed. The bully pulpit and the president pen became the main tools of the White House and used to instantiate Trump's priorities, making it easier to drill for oil and harder to get Medicaid. Closing the country off, caging immigrants and punishing non-citizens, and engaging in a quixotic trade war with China. More recently, Trump has used executive orders to try to provide relief from the coronavirus-induced recession as Congress has stalled on another aid bill. But the slowdown in legislation is not Trump's fault exclusively. Conflicts between the House and the Senate, the constraints of the Byrd Rule, which bars certain bills from increasing the budget deficit outside of a 10-year window, and polarization moving the parties apart, partisanship rendering cross-aisle compromise electorally toxic, all of those factors have made it less and less likely that Congress would do its job. An analyst by the Pew Research Center, for instance, found that the share of legislation deemed substantive, and then it changed the federal law or federal spending rather than say renaming a post office, was 20 percentage points lower in the 115th Congress than the 105th. Even when a single party controls both houses and the White House, legislation is a slog thanks to the use and the abuse of the filibuster. This makes the Senate minority a potent check on the Senate majority. People think unified government means that Congress would do no more, Bender said, but even unified governments have become less productive over time. Politicians cited the enmity with Congress and negative partisanship, where hatred of the other side becomes even more important than belief in one's own side, as other crucial factors. When you want to accomplish anything big in this country under a system, you really have to buy in from both sides. John Faisal, a former representative, said, "If you are an incendiary, and if you think in extreme ways, it gets you on MSNBC or Fro, but it doesn't help us solve the problem. I think that's part of why we're not successful in fixing the healthcare system." Divisions within the GOP have gummed up the works as well. Trump's ban on a flame-throwing populism cracked open a party already ideologically fractured. Business roundtable types supported reducing impediments to trade. Trump wanted a trade war. Fiscal hawks wanted to reform the entitlement programs. Trump vowed not to touch those, but he probably will. Moderate Republicans wanted comprehensive immigration reform. Trump embraced a nationalist, isolationist policy. Many conservative beltway types hate the Trump agenda and the values that he represents. The base is more fractured on policy issues than is commonly recognized. The political scientist Larry Bartels of Vanderbilt University has argued that conservatives are fairly consistent across the board in, say, revering the American flag and expressing antipathy towards Muslims, immigrants, and atheists. They are united in a culture war. They are divided, however, on kitchen table economic issues. Average Republicans are much more supportive of redistribution and environmental law than elite Republicans, for instance. A majority of the Republicans endorse government efforts to regulate pollution, provide a decent standard of living for people unable to work, and ensure access to good health care. Bartels wrote in the 2018 study, substantial minorities favor reducing income differences and helping families pay for child care and college. One final reason why Trump's GOP can't point to many legislative victories is because the kinds of bold, big policy proposals once floated by powerful Republicans were so unpopular as to be politically suicidal. Overturning Obamacare, unpopular, a difficult one way or another, and replacing it with something else unpopular, so hard that Republicans never come up with a viable way to do it. And cutting Social Security, which is toxic, particularly among the older Americans who actually showed up to vote. Balancing the budget, a doctoral level math problem requiring a series of politically devastating cuts. They could have gutted Obamacare and they could have destroyed Medicare, David Carroll, a political scientist at the University of Maryland, said. I don't think the welfare state survived Republican unified government because of this filibuster. It survived it because they were afraid. Even when they had the votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, it wasn't going to happen because enough of them were terrified of doing it. The GOP might not have a broad, forward-looking, unifying agenda, but that does not mean it's a do-nothing party. Technically, it is. Republicans remain engaged on immigration, trade taxes, and business regulation. They have found enormous success in manipulating the regulatory state and stacking the judiciary. Arguably, the party is simply meeting its voters where they are. Over the past 4 decades, the GOP electorate has become older, whiter, more rural, non-Christian, and more male than the electorate as a whole, remaining richer than it is too. The party has pivoted and pushed right according to the preferences of the homogeneous people in that shrieking tent. The plutocrats and the business owners who make up the Republican donor class want tax cuts and a rollback of regulatory rules. And that is what they got under Trump. The groups lobbying the Republican Party, like the NRA, basically want to preserve the status quo. And Carroll, the business people care about taxes and deregulation. That stuff is quiet under the radar. Though the NLRB and OSHA and others, after the tax cuts, they don't need legislation. For the many Republicans who don't benefit much from tax cuts and never received the promised populist policies, identity politics and racial resentment are strong enough to force to tie them to the party. A study by the political scientists Alan Amberwitz and Jennifer McCoy, for instance, showed that Trump's dog whistling worked. In 2000, George W. Bush won two and three working class white voters who were convinced, or they were considerable racial resentment measured by asking them whether or not they agree with statements such as if blacks would only try harder, they could just be as well off as whites. Trump got 9 and 10 out of those. Trump electrifies the party's broader base with revanchism, nativism, and white nationalists, catering to the anxieties of a historically hyper-dominant group fast becoming a minority. Just take a look at who was speaking at the GOP convention to see what red meat looks like for a red America. The couple who brandished guns at Black Lives Matter protesters in St. Louis and Nick Salmon of Covington High School, whose interaction with the Native American activist Nathan Phillips in front of the Lincoln Memorial went viral back last year. Or in the absence of a national 2020 manifesto, take a look at the Texas platform. Delegates picked top priorities including banning gender confirmation procedures, protecting monuments, purging the voter rolls, and preventing teenagers from getting abortions or obtaining birth control without parental consent. All potent fronts in the culture where policy doesn't matter much to winnable conservative voters, Brent Buchanan, a Republican pollster, said. It's more about personality and principles. On the principles front, the party has secured sweeping control of the courts, the singular obsession of Senate Majority Leader Moscow Mitch. The Supreme Court is now lost to progressives for a generation. It may block or impede universal health care insurance legislation, campaign finance laws, and climate change legislation, among other Democratic priorities. As Boner put it shortly before Trump's victory, actually it wasn't really a victory for him anyway, the legislative process, the political process, is at a standstill and will be regardless of who wins. The only thing that really matters over the next 4 years or 8 years is who's going to appoint the next Supreme Court nominees, and obviously not Trump. Viewed this way, the Republican policy portfolio is both extremely slender and extremely successful. Don't underestimate this in talking about Republicans. They've been able to stack the Supreme Court despite having won only one popular vote in over 30 years. Jacob Hackner, a political scientist at Yale and co-author of the new book, Let Them Eat Tweets had said. It's pretty remarkable. That takes some chutzpah and skill, and it's worth a lot. If the states and the Supreme Court are doing what you want, and you want to trash the executive state from the White House, you're not doing bad. But in terms of building the popular agenda, it's not inspiring. Not inspiring, and perhaps not sustainable either. Following Mitt Romney's narrow defeat to President Obama in 2012, the GOP prepared a 100-page autopsy examining its failure. How had one of the party's brightest lights failed to unseat a struggling roadblock president presiding over the worst economy in decades? The answer: it was relying on an aging, homogeneous coalition. It was winning elections on technicalities rather than taking a large share of the popular vote. And it was failing to attract young, diverse voters. The party had to change to survive. It was a moral and existential imperative, many in the GOP decided. Trump heeded none of the warnings from that autopsy or any of the myriad other think tank reports, voter surveys, or internal party documents coming to the same obvious conclusion. Appealing to white voters to win elections cannot work forever in a country becoming less white. If Trump got exactly the same share of voters, sorted by racial and ethnic groups, that he got in 2016 this year, he would likely lose because of a simple demographic change. The Republicans are losing about $5 in every sale and trying to make it up on volume. Stuart Stevens, a longtime Republican campaign consultant and now a prominent anti-Trumper, had said, "Just look at the country. Those who are 15 years old and younger, the majority are non-white. They're going to turn 18 and remain non-white. That's a death sentence for the Republican Party." The guillotine has not yet fallen. Republicans continue to stare down what the Harvard political scientist Daniel Ziblatt has described as the conservative dilemma. Conservative parties are preservationists. They seek to sustain an egalitarian hierarchy world. What happens when they need votes from outside their elite circle to win? Anytime you have a political party that perceives that it is representing a shrinking demographic, that your political party's base is existentially threatened, it takes measures to defend or change itself, he told me, to make America great again, technically under Trump it's make America hate, or take our country back. These are expressions of a sense that the tide of history is moving against us. Ziblatt identifies a number of strategies that parties have used over the decades to solve the conservative dilemma. They may develop a strong political infrastructure, getting better at campaigning and getting out the vote, or they may engage in anti-democratic behaviors, such as stuffing ballot boxes or jailing opponents. They may moderate on economic terms and win over the center, or they may whip up a culture war and stoke xenophobic sentiments, getting voters to focus on an identitarian threat. The Republican Party has kept winning, not really, at least for the moment, with options 2 and 4. It has engaged in an athletic effort to shore up Republican role, gerrymandering, manipulating the census, pushing voter ID rules, taking away polling places, and attacking mail-in voting, the very infrastructure of the American political system riddled with anti-democratic bodies. And it has helped the party resist change. The Electoral College, which is a joke, has thrown 2 of the past 5 presidential elections to Republicans who lost the popular vote. In Trump's case, Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million ballots. The Supreme Court, stacked with conservative appointees, keeps batting down the small Democratic initiatives. The Senate systematically overrepresents Republicans, giving a Wyoming voter 80 times the sway of a Californian. What is precarious about that is you have a declining popular majority, but you're able to hold on to power through these kinds of counter-majoritarian institutions, Ziblatt said. That generates a certain kind of panic about the world because you realize that power is very precarious. I think it's a dangerous combination. This is what ties Republican countlessness to the threat to American democracy. The GOP is not trying to win over more votes. It just wants to win in general. What would get Republicans to change, to adapt, to grow, and to develop new ideas? Political scientists, polling experts, and policy wonks all said the same thing: losing, soundly, badly, and repeatedly. Parties grow in opposition, said Norris, the Harvard political scientist said. They don't learn when they're in government when they're winning, because they're winning. If they have a winning strategy, they repeat the winning strategy even when the public is moving away from them. This is a well-known tendency. They need to ask themselves, what the fuck went wrong? The Labour Party defeated again and again by Margaret Thatcher. The Tories shut out again and again by Tony Blair. The Democrats humbled by the Reagan years, the Republicans need to be humbled too, and for some time. But the party has gotten sick and tired of winning, to borrow a phrase, and has lost its sense of purpose. At least some Republicans argue. I don't think a party can exist without a logical framework, Stevens said, who's the author of the new book "It Was All a Lie," said decrying the loss of fiscal responsibility and personal character as conservative North Stars. Elizabeth Warren, she can articulate a coherent theory of government, but you can hate it all you want to, or you can love it. You can agree with some of it, but there's no Republican equivalent with any credibility. With Trump's loss a real possibility, many moderate Republicans are trying to generate that credible policy vision. The Romneys of the world are waiting for Trump to fail. Child care proposals in hand. Reformicons are pushing out ideas for family-friendly, softly redistributive policies from their think tanks. Larry Hogan, the Maryland governor, has argued that the National Party is primed for a shift to the center, but such change will prove enormously difficult to party that has prided itself on slashing taxes, slashing regulations, and employing the administrative state to discourage use of the safety net. It will prove enormously difficult for a party whose base continues to turn out for the culture war. Not for careful bipartisan immigration proposals. It will prove enormously difficult for a party whose donor class experts continued tax cuts and deregulation, and whose portfolios rely on them. Republican moderation won't happen in a vacuum. Voters will still face a choice between Republican and Democrats. As the Republican Party has thinned and narrowed and moved to the right, the Democratic Party has swelled and stretched as the Republican Party has given up on any policy. The Democratic Party has entered a period of almost ludicrous technocratic fecundity, whatever that means. But Joe Biden's campaign is currently offering up 46 separate policy documents to Trump's zero. Its coalition spans from Democratic Socialists to neo-democratic moderates, and includes both Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and George W. Bush's Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who spoke at the Democratic National Convention. If you want some version of Romney's health policies or Ronald Reagan's cap and trade initiatives, you're voting for a Democrat in the next election. Moreover, moderation might not prove enough to lure back non-white voters and derided and discouraged by the Republican Party for so long. For us to see a Republican getting not 15 but 25%, maybe 30%, and 33% of the black voters, in order to get that kind of change, you need something transformative, said Leah Wright Rigueur, a political scientist at Harvard, had said. We have a hard time imagining what Donald Trump could do that would shift the polls, particularly given that black public opinion around Donald Trump is so abysmal right now. It would have to do something like universal health care. Donald Trump would have to pass reparations, nor does it seem that voters are apt to forget that Republicans fell in line behind Trump. She added, Trumpism will remain with Republicans long after Trump is gone. Republicans just might have the chance to figure things out given where Trump is in the polls. Some show him losing Texas, others Georgia. Stevens described this year as a Chernobyl moment for the GOP, and said he suspects that we're in for a long spell of center-left government. In that moderated town hall, even Trump did not sound sure that he was headed for anything but electoral defeat, though he has more recently argued that any election he does not win will be illegitimate, which it won't be. Just to say what Trump had said the last time, Trump claims that Biden couldn't speak. He's going to be your president because some people don't love me, maybe. I said, well, Biden actually speaks better than you fucking fat ass, and people don't love you because you're a fucking failure. Why the fuck would anybody love your fat ass? But if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Random Mike, and also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out, and thanks for listening.